The single cowboy said, "Your daughter needs a home, and my life needs you." The town of Red Hollow was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel louder than it should. The wind pushed dust through the empty streets, brushing against wooden doors and old fences. People here kept to themselves. Life was hard, and trust was harder. On one such evening, as the sun began to set and painted the sky in soft orange and gold, a lone cowboy rode slowly toward the town. His name was Caleb Turner. He wasn't in a hurry. He never was. His horse moved at an easy pace, its hooves pressing softly into the dry ground. Caleb's face was calm, but his eyes were tired. He had seen too much of the world. Long roads, lonely nights, and memories he didn't speak about. He had no home, no family, and no reason to stay anywhere for long. But today was different. In his pocket was a letter. He had read it many times on his journey, even though it was short. The words were simple, but they stayed with him. The letter was from a woman named Eliza Hart. She had written about her ranch just outside Red Hollow. Times were hard, she said. The land was dry, the work was heavy, and she was raising her young daughter alone. She didn't ask for pity. She only asked for help. Someone strong, someone honest, someone who could stay. Caleb didn't know why he answered that letter. Maybe it reminded him of something he had lost long ago. Maybe he was just tired of riding alone. Or maybe, deep down, he wanted a reason to stop. As he reached the edge of town, a few people looked at him from a distance. Strangers were not common here. A man standing outside a small store watched Caleb carefully, his eyes full of questions. Caleb gave a small nod but said nothing. He rode past the town and followed the dirt road leading out toward the open land. The Hart Ranch was not hard to find. It stood alone under a wide sky, surrounded by broken fences and dry fields. The house was small and worn, but it was still standing strong, just like the person who lived in it. Caleb stopped his horse near the gate and looked around. The place needed work, a lot of it. Before he could call out, the front door opened. Eliza Hart stepped outside. She was not what Caleb expected. She looked strong, not weak. Her face was serious, her eyes sharp and careful. She held herself like someone who had learned to depend only on herself. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Caleb slowly got down from his horse and removed his hat. "Ma'am," he said in a calm voice, "I got your letter." Eliza looked at him from head to toe, studying him. She didn't smile. "You're the cowboy?" she asked. "Yes," Caleb replied. "Name's Caleb Turner." There was a short silence. Eliza crossed her arms slightly, still unsure. "I didn't expect someone to actually come." Caleb gave a small shrug. "Didn't expect myself to come either." That almost sounded like a joke, but Eliza didn't laugh. Instead, she stepped a little closer, still keeping her distance. "I don't need trouble," she said clearly. "And I don't need a man who's just passing through." Caleb nodded. "I understand." His voice was steady, honest. "I ain't here to cause trouble," he added. "And I ain't planning on leaving tomorrow." Eliza looked at him carefully again. She had heard words like this before, and they didn't always mean much. Before she could reply, a small voice came from behind her. "Ma?" A little girl stepped out from the doorway, holding onto the edge of the door. Her hair was a bit messy, and her eyes were full of curiosity. She looked at Caleb like he was something new and exciting. "This is Lily," Eliza said softly, without turning back. Caleb looked at the girl and gave a gentle smile. "Hello there." Lily didn't say anything at first, but she didn't hide either. Caleb then looked back at Eliza. He paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Then he spoke in a quiet but firm voice. "Your daughter needs a home," he said. "And I think my life needs one too." The words hung in the air. Eliza's expression didn't change much, but something in her eyes shifted, just a little. She wasn't convinced, not yet, but she also didn't tell him to leave. The wind moved softly across the dry land as the sun dropped lower in the sky. The ranch stood quiet, waiting, and for the first time in a long time, Caleb Turner didn't feel like riding away. The next morning at the Hart Ranch began before the sun had fully risen. The sky was still pale, and the air carried a cool breeze. Caleb Turner was already awake. He had slept in the small barn, not wanting to step into the house without being invited. He didn't expect comfort. He never did. But something about this place made him feel like he should try, slowly. He stepped outside, stretching his arms, and looked over the land again. In the early light, the ranch looked even more worn. Fences leaned in different directions, some broken completely. The ground was dry and cracked in places. A few animals moved slowly, looking tired. There was a lot to fix. Caleb didn't wait for instructions. He picked up tools near the barn and walked toward the nearest broken fence. If he was going to stay, even for a short time, he would make himself useful. Inside the house, Eliza Hart stood near the window watching him. She hadn't expected him to wake up so early. Most men she had known liked to talk big, but worked slow. Caleb said very little and worked without being told. Still, she didn't trust him. Not yet. Lily, her daughter, sat at the table eating quietly. She looked out the window too, her eyes bright with interest. "Is he staying?" Lily asked softly. Eliza didn't answer right away. She turned back to the stove and stirred the pot slowly. "We'll see," she said. Outside, Caleb worked through the morning. He fixed broken wood, tightened ropes, and made the fence stand strong again. Sweat formed on his forehead, but he didn't stop. The work was hard, but it felt right. After some time, he heard small footsteps behind him. He turned slightly and saw Lily standing a few feet away. "You're fixing it," she said. Caleb gave a small nod. "Trying to." She stepped closer, curious but careful. "Mama says it's been broken for a long time." Caleb looked at the fence. "Then it's about time it got fixed." Lily smiled a little at that. For the first time, Caleb felt something warm in his chest. It had been a long time since someone watched him like that, with simple trust. Later that day, Eliza came out with a bucket of water. She placed it near him without saying much. "Drink," she said. Caleb nodded. "Thank you." They stood there in silence for a moment. The wind moved gently across the land. "You work fast," Eliza said finally. Caleb shrugged. "Work keeps the mind busy." Eliza studied him again. "And what is it you're trying not to think about?" Caleb paused. For a moment, it seemed like he might answer, but then he simply said, "Old things." Eliza didn't push further. She understood that answer more than she wanted to. Days began to pass. Caleb stayed. He repaired fences, cleaned the barn, and helped with the animals. Slowly, the ranch began to look a little better. It wasn't perfect, but it was improving. Lily followed him almost everywhere. She asked many questions about horses, about the road, about the places he had seen. Caleb answered simply, sometimes with short stories, sometimes with just a few words. But he never ignored her, and Lily never seemed bored. Eliza noticed this. She also noticed something else. Caleb never crossed any line. He stayed respectful, kept his distance, and never tried to act like he belonged. It was as if he was waiting for permission, or maybe for trust. But trouble was closer than any of them realized. One afternoon, as Caleb worked near the edge of the land, he saw dust rising in the distance. A group of riders approached slowly. His expression changed. He stood still, watching. The riders stopped near the boundary of the ranch. Their leader, a tall man with a sharp face, looked over the land like it already belonged to him. This was Victor Kane, a man known in the area for taking what he wanted, through money, pressure, or fear. Eliza stepped outside when she saw them. Her face grew tense, but she didn't step back. Kane smiled slightly as he looked at her. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "Still holding on, I see." "This land is mine," Eliza replied firmly. Kane's eyes moved toward Caleb for a moment, then back to Eliza. "You should think carefully. Times are changing. It might be easier to let go." Eliza didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was strong enough. Kane gave a small nod and turned his horse. "We'll talk again," he said before riding away with his men. The dust settled slowly after they left. Caleb walked over to Eliza. "Who is he?" he asked, though he already had an idea. "Trouble," Eliza said quietly. Caleb looked out at the land, then back at her. "This place means a lot to you," he said. Eliza met his eyes. "It's all we have." There was a pause. Then Caleb spoke, his voice calm but steady. "Then we don't let anyone take it." Eliza didn't respond right away, but this time, when she looked at him, there was less doubt in her eyes, and maybe just a small beginning of trust. The days after Victor Kane's visit did not feel the same. The air around the Hart Ranch grew heavy, like a storm was coming, but no rain would fall. Even the animals seemed restless. The quiet peace that had slowly started to grow was now filled with worry. Eliza felt it the most. She worked as usual, feeding the animals, fixing small things around the house, and taking care of Lily, but her mind was always somewhere else. Kane's words stayed with her. She knew men like him did not make empty threats. Caleb noticed it too. He said little, but he watched everything. One evening, as the sky turned dark and the wind picked up, Caleb walked the edges of the ranch, checking the fences one more time. He moved carefully, his eyes scanning the land. Something didn't feel right. Then he saw it. A section of the fence, one he had fixed just days ago, was broken again. Not by accident. Cut. Caleb's face hardened. He looked around, but the land was empty. Whoever had done it was gone. He returned to the house quickly. "Eliza!" he called as he stepped inside. She looked up immediately. "What is it?" "The fence on the east side, it's been cut." Eliza's expression went still. "You're sure?" Caleb nodded. This wasn't weather. Someone did it. Lily looked between them, confused and a little scared. Eliza knelt beside her gently. "Go to your room, sweetheart," she said softly. "Everything is fine." Lily hesitated but nodded and walked away. When she was gone, Eliza stood up, her face tense. "It's him," she said quietly. "Cain." Caleb didn't argue. He knew she was right. "He's trying to scare you," Caleb said. "Push you to give up." Eliza crossed her arms tightly. "I won't." Her voice was strong, but there was fear behind it. Caleb saw it, and he understood it. That night, neither of them slept much. The wind grew stronger, and the sound of it moving through the broken fence felt like a warning. Every small noise made them alert. Then, just before midnight, it happened. Distant hoofbeats. Caleb heard them first. He stood up quickly and stepped outside, his eyes sharp in the darkness. In the distance, shadows moved. Riders. More than one. Eliza came out behind him. "What is it?" "Inside," Caleb said firmly. "Stay with Lily." But Eliza didn't move. "This is my home." Caleb looked at her for a moment. He respected her strength, but this was dangerous. "They're not here to talk," he said. The riders came closer, stopping near the edge of the ranch. They didn't enter fully, but their message was clear. One of them rode forward and threw something onto the ground near the fence. Then they turned and rode away without a word. Caleb walked over carefully and picked up what they had left. A piece of wood, burned at the edges. A warning. Eliza stood beside him, her face pale but steady. "He wants us gone." Caleb looked out into the darkness. "Then he's going to have to try harder than that," he said. The next morning, the ranch felt quieter than ever. Lily stayed close to Eliza, sensing the tension. She didn't ask questions this time. Caleb worked, but his focus had changed. He was no longer just fixing things. He was preparing. Later that day, Eliza found him near the barn. "You've seen things like this before," she said. It wasn't a question. Caleb didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, he spoke. "I wasn't always just a cowboy," he said. Eliza waited. "I used to ride with a group," he continued. "We kept the law in places where there wasn't much of it. We dealt with men like Cain." Eliza's eyes widened slightly. "What happened?" Caleb looked down for a moment, his expression heavy. "Things went wrong," he said. "Someone I trusted made a bad choice. People got hurt." His voice was calm, but the weight of his past was clear. "I left after that," he added. "Didn't want that life anymore." Eliza studied him. "And now?" she asked. Caleb looked at her, then at the house where Lily stood in the doorway watching them. "Now I don't think I can walk away," he said. There was something different in his voice this time. Not just honesty. Decision. Eliza felt it. For the first time, she didn't see him as a stranger or just a helper. She saw someone who was choosing to stay. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "What are we going to do?" she asked quietly. Caleb straightened slightly. "We stand," he said, "and we make sure he knows this land isn't his." Eliza nodded slowly. The fear was still there, but it was no longer alone. That evening, Caleb rode into town. He spoke to a few people, men who had also been pushed by Cain, men who had stayed quiet out of fear. Caleb didn't make big speeches. He just told them the truth. "If no one stands," he said, "then Cain keeps taking." Some of them listened. Some of them looked unsure. But a few nodded, and that was enough to start. As Caleb rode back to the ranch under the fading light, the wind had calmed. The land looked the same, but something had changed. The fight was no longer coming. It had already begun. The morning of the final day came quietly. The sky was clear, and the sun rose slowly over the land, casting long shadows across the Hart Ranch. Everything looked peaceful, but it was the kind of peace that came before something important. Caleb Turner was already awake. He stood near the fence, looking out at the open land. His face was calm, but his eyes were focused. He knew Cain would return. Men like him did not stop until they got what they wanted, or were forced to stop. Behind him, the ranch was no longer as broken as before. The fences stood stronger. The barn was cleaner. The land still needed work, but it no longer looked like it was ready to fall apart. Eliza stepped out of the house, her expression steady. "You think today is the day?" she asked. Caleb nodded slightly. "Yes." Eliza looked toward the horizon. "Then we face it." There was no fear in her voice now, only quiet strength. Lily stood by the door, holding on to the wooden frame. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could feel it. Caleb walked over and knelt slightly in front of her. "Stay close to your ma today," he said gently. Lily nodded. "Are you going somewhere?" Caleb gave a small smile. "No, I'm staying right here." That answer seemed enough for her. As the sun rose higher, the sound of horses came from the distance. Caleb turned. They were coming. Victor Cain rode at the front, with several men behind him. This time, they didn't stop at the edge. They rode straight toward the ranch, confident and sure. But this time, things were different. Caleb wasn't alone. From the road behind the ranch, a few riders approached, men from the town. Not many, but enough to show that Eliza and Caleb were no longer standing by themselves. Cain noticed them. His expression changed slightly, but he didn't stop. He pulled his horse to a halt a few steps away from Caleb. "Well," Cain said, looking around. "Looks like you've gathered some company." Caleb stood firm. "Looks like you came expecting an easy win." Cain smiled faintly. "This land isn't yours." Eliza stepped forward beside Caleb. "It is mine." Cain's eyes narrowed. "Not according to the papers." Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "Those papers you're talking about," he said. "They're not clean." Cain's smile faded. Caleb continued, his voice clear and steady. "You've been using false claims. Old debts that were already settled. I checked. Others in town know it too." The men behind Cain shifted slightly. Caleb took another step forward. "You can try to take this land," he said, "but it won't stay quiet anymore." For a moment, everything went still. The wind moved softly across the ground. Cain looked around, at the ranch, at the people standing together, at the quiet strength in front of him. This was not what he expected. He wasn't facing fear anymore. He was facing resistance. Cain let out a slow breath and looked back at Caleb. "You think this changes anything?" Caleb didn't move. "It already has." Another long silence followed. Then slowly, Cain turned his horse. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice no longer carried the same power. He rode away, his men following behind him. The sound of hooves faded into the distance, and just like that, it was over. The tension that had held the ranch for days finally broke. Eliza let out a quiet breath she didn't realize she was holding. Lily ran forward and hugged her tightly. The men from town nodded to Caleb and Eliza before slowly heading back, their job done. Caleb stood still for a moment, watching the empty horizon. The land was quiet again, but this time it felt different. Safe. Eliza walked toward him. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. Caleb looked at her. "I know." "Then why did you?" He thought for a moment, then he gave a simple answer. "Because it mattered." Eliza studied him, her eyes no longer guarded. For the first time, there was trust, and something more. Days passed, the ranch grew stronger, life returned to a steady rhythm. Work in the mornings, quiet evenings, and small moments of peace. Lily laughed more, her voice filling the space that once felt empty. And Caleb. He stayed. One evening as the sun began to set, he stood near the house, looking out at the land. He had spent years riding from place to place, never stopping, never belonging. But now, something felt different. He wasn't thinking about the next road. He wasn't thinking about leaving. Eliza stepped outside and stood beside him. "You've been quiet," she said. Caleb gave a small smile. "Just thinking." "About leaving?" she asked gently. Caleb shook his head. "No," he said. "About staying." Eliza looked at him, her expression soft. The wind moved through the fields, carrying the sound of Lily playing nearby. Caleb took a slow breath. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel lost. He had found something real, a place, a family, a home, and this time, he wasn't going anywhere.